So a little bit switching gears, we're going to talk about nutrition for pig health, but in this aspect, we're going to be basically talking about nutrient requirements and specifically amino acids. The reason why this has been a major focus, and I'm thinking you're all aware, right, that antimicrobial stewardship has become an increasingly important topic, especially with livestock. When I first came and did this tour, we were not quite at the AGP. We're not banned yet, but the legislation was in place and it was coming. And so this has led a lot of the question as to how do we feed pigs for health and how do we feed pigs to prevent disease or to treat pigs. It is also a matter of that society and our consumers, our customers are actually demanding that we reduce antimicrobials in our livestock as well. So multiple reasons to do this. The use in swine is going down, so it is a good news story based on the latest. I say the latest, but CPARS does not really keep things up to date. The latest I could find was 2018 for reporting. You can see there is still quite a bit of antimicrobial use in pigs, and I think the most telling number here is that 65% of the reported in-feed use is still for prevention of enteric and respiratory diseases. So this continues to be an issue that we need to address. And like I said, majority is down, but we still have quite a ways to go, especially when it comes for prevention. The other reason that we want to focus on this is that, and I'm sure you're aware, is that pigs grow more slowly when they're sick, or even if they're not overtly showing signs of disease, just that subclinical disease. We get a reduction in lean gain, a reduction in feed efficiency, resulting anywhere from $8 to $30 financial loss per market pig. And a lot of this is due to an increase in mortality up to 20% depending on what's going on. Not to mention all the increases in your vet costs and diagnostic fees and treatment fees and all this other stuff, right? This was a study by John Patience where they looked at 3 different types of barns, a low challenge, medium challenge, or a high challenge, disease challenge barns, and they looked at the overall economics based on how the pigs were growing and mortality and such. So you can see that even at a medium challenge, or what they define as a medium challenge, you can lose about $11 per pig place and up to 20 in a high challenge barn. So your losses can be significant in this, and so a lot of it is how do we minimize those. The other thing, like I mentioned before with climate change, and like it or not, it is part of the discussion, and I think we're going to have to start including it in our plans for growing pigs, that we tend to focus on feed conversion or our feed processing as the major area for reducing emissions, but actually in a this is the Trow model for nutrient utilization, that they actually showed that healthy or diseased pigs are actually the bigger contributor to carbon emissions from pork production. So it's an area that we can easily, I think, address. Obviously, alternatives to antibiotics has been in everybody's minds and everything, especially over the last 10 years or so. I personally don't like to use alternatives to antibiotics because I don't think we're going to find an alternative to an antibiotic that's not an antibiotic, right? They are unique in how they work and how the mode of action and what their plan is. So I think what we're looking at is what can we include in the diet to support the animal and support its growth and its immune response and gut health, right? So I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have multiple tools in the toolbox that we can add together and utilize. I'm not going to talk about most of these because that's been done to death in a lot of other presentations. I will just highlight 2 that I've starred 2 of these because spray-dried plasma, even though it has largely been, and unfortunately these starred ones are the ones that generally show the most are consistent in their positive effects, but spray-dried plasma obviously has its own health concerns with utilizing it, and zinc and copper, as I'm sure you're aware, have been limited in their use for antimicrobial use in the EU. And generally something that happens in the EU, eventually we see over here at some point. And I think there's rumblings that we are going to eventually be limited in our use of zinc and copper as antimicrobials. So it's not something that I think we want to hang our hat on. What we have now been moving forward with the nutrition community is looking more at functional nutrition, or the functional aspects of nutrients. And this is what is their value beyond just for growth performance. And I know we're a growth performance oriented industry, but by supporting some of these other factors, such as the immune response of the animal or the gut development of the animal, we will overall have an improvement in our performance rate. And so a lot of these nutrients, even though we define them by their requirement for growth, can have other aspects, I'm sure with omega-3s, undigested proteins, specifically high and low protein diets in the nursery and predisposing to diarrhea. And fiber is probably the bigger one, where we know that, there are benefits to including fiber or some of these in the diet that you don't necessarily see with growth. What I'm going to focus, though, is amino acid requirements. And this is one of the biggest ones, when we talk about growth. But the concept of the amino acid requirement is largely then based on growth, right? And the requirement tables that we have and what your nutritionists are generally using are based on a healthy, fast-growing animal with normal feed intake. And I would argue that these are probably then not appropriate in an unhealthy animal or an animal going disease challenge. So we may need to start looking at altering those values. To show you specifically how this might change with the type of disease challenge too, these are two different meta-analyses that kind of use the same methodology to look at a number of studies looking at different challenges, anywhere from digestive bacterial infections, just general poor housing conditions, mycotoxins, parasitic and respiratory diseases, that they determined the proportion of the reduction in performance that was due to either just the drop in feed intake that you see, or due to a change in how the nutrients were being utilized. And so, for instance, we have digestive bacterial infections. So these would be your salmonella and E. coli, right? Some of it is due to an intake issue, but most of it is because the animal is not using the nutrients the same way. Whereas mycotoxins is the opposite, where the majority of it is due to that feed intake, and there's some evidence that there might be a change in nutrient requirements. So this changes how we would address these, right? Mycotoxins, you might not need to do a change in your diet formulation, but enteric diseases you will. I think it's also important to look at, and this comes back to the mycotoxin study as well, with the growers versus the finishers and their responses, is that we showed that while a younger animal will have a more drastic initial response to a disease challenge, it recovers faster than an older animal will. So the older animal won't necessarily be as badly affected, but it's going to take them a much longer time to recover. So in this graph, C1 is your nursery, C2 is grower, and C3 would be finisher. So you can see that the finishers, they don't drop as much, but it takes them much longer to recover and get back up to that level. Generally, when we're talking about how pigs are utilizing nutrients, this is what we see in a healthy animal. Some of it is going to go to your maintenance functions, and most of them are going to go to growth and be limited by amino acid efficiency and protein turnover and the genetic ability of that animal. But when we introduce disease, we get a shift. Or this is what's generally thought, is now the amino acids and the other nutrients are going to go to support that immune response. Less is going to go to growth. I think the bigger problem is, specifically because now they have a reduction in the feed intake and the profile of those nutrients are based on growth, that the animal is going to have to more increasingly rely on its own muscle stores. And so it's going to catabolize muscle protein in order to then provide more amino acids. So we make the problem even worse. I know this is very small, but this is just to show that with some of the amino acids, specifically the sulfur, so methionine and cysteine, threonine and tryptophan are some of the amino acids that specifically have a lot of information available that shows that they have benefits beyond just for growth and for supporting the health of the animal. There's also a number of studies that have looked at the requirements for these specific amino acids are increased under a disease challenge. So on the left here we have for methionine and cysteine specifically. So this is a healthy pig, and then you can see that they weren't even able to determine the break point when they stimulated the immune response. It had increased so much. The middle one here is for threonine under disease challenge, so the bottom graph would be in the challenged animal, and you can see that that break point is higher, so a higher threonine, and the same with tryptophan. And this is not seen in all of the amino acids, right? And that's where I'm talking about that profile might need to be different. One of the main points that I want, and maybe this is more for the nutritionist, and talk to your nutritionist, is again, when we're focusing on growth, if we only focus on the growth requirement and the break point for that, we might be missing out on being able to optimize and maximize another outcome that might be more important in that population. So, specifically, if you're looking at nitrogen retention in the sows, the requirement would be this dark black graph here, and the requirement would be at the peak. But if we want to maximize the number of piglets born, then the requirement is up here. And I've shown that this is not just unique in pigs, that they've shown that this is the same if you look at different outcomes in fish. So this one is specifically tilapia if you want to do retention efficiency, so growth. But if you want to look at mortality or survival, then the requirement is higher. And the same with broilers, with immunoglobulin or immune status, and looking at body weight gain versus mortality. So it's one of those things, maybe keep in mind, what are you trying to optimize and maximize, and that the requirements for growth might not be sufficient in order to maximize different outcomes. One of the things then we wanted to start looking at is, okay, if we know these amino acids are useful, under what circumstances and what other factors do you need to consider? And one of the things specifically with threonine, and we know this, that if you include fiber in the diet, the threonine requirement is greater because it's supporting that mucin response in the gut. So then the question is if you have an immune challenge that also requires threonine, do you have a further requirement? So in this one, we basically took our pigs, we fed them either a low fiber diet or a fiber supplemented diet, and then we measured the threonine requirement in healthy animals versus sick animals. And this is what we saw before, that if you have the high fiber, you get an increase in the threonine requirement. If you have a sick animal, you have an increase in the threonine requirement. But if you have both together, you don't get a further increase. So we were like, okay, what's going on here? One of the things that we mentioned is the fecal mucin. So we measured mucin increase. So fiber is doing what it's supposed to do, that it increases that mucin, that barrier function in the gut. And then we actually measured barrier function or leaky gut. And so a higher value here is a negative. That means it's a leakier gut. So you can see in the healthy animal with a high fiber, we don't have a very leaky gut. If we have the high fiber in a sick, an immune stimulated animal, we also don't have that. But a low fiber diet, and if we immune stimulate, then the gut is not doing very well. So in this situation, what we think is that the fiber is actually beneficial in that it is helping to maintain that barrier function, even though the animal is immune stimulated. Some of the other ones factors that we wanted to get into was specifically then, if we do a blend of these amino acids, is it beneficial to the pig? And then is there an effect of the protein content in the diet as well? Because we know that protein, especially a high protein, you can get an increase in E. coli and other pathogens and affect the gut function. So here we took our pigs, we fed them either a low or a high protein diet, and then we supplemented or not with a blend of amino acids. In all the studies I'm going to talk about, it's the same blend. We put threonine, methionine, and tryptophan at 120% of the NRC requirements, so they're getting 20% more of those three amino acids in all of these studies when I say that we added the functional amino acid blend. We then challenged them with salmonella, so they were on that diet for 7 days. We challenged them with salmonella and then followed them. So basically, if we have no functional amino acids in, regardless of the protein content, the pig growth was reduced. If we gave the functional amino acids, the growth was improved. And then, interestingly enough, when we looked at the response to the salmonella challenge, we expected that those amino acids are going to support the immune response, but what we saw with the amino acid supplemented pigs is that their immune response was actually attenuated. It is lower than what you saw in just a salmonella challenged animal. And so that was a little bit surprising, but what we think is going on is specifically that it is helping to support the barrier function in that initial kind of mode of prevention. And so the salmonella is not infiltrating, it's not growing the way it's supposed to, or that it wants to, right? So you're preventing kind of that negative. So here, just so you can see the actual growth performance numbers that we saw, these ones here are in the unchallenged, so the week before we did the challenge. So you can see that you don't see anything. And this is one of the things that I want, is that if you are trying to evaluate whether or not these amino acids are going to be beneficial purely on growth, you're going to say, nope, I'm not going to put them in. But keeping in mind that they are working behind the scenes to help set your animal up for success if it is going to go into an area where it might have a challenge. These ones here are post-salmonella challenge, so you can see that that growth performance was reduced without the amino acids and then increased with the additional amino acids. Not to this level, right? But it is doing something and helping out, and if we can help reduce that reduction in performance, then that's all the better. In this situation, it was interesting, so we didn't see any effect of protein, and this is 24 versus 20% crude protein in the content in the diet. We don't know if it's just because the protein we were using doesn't have the negative effect, or salmonella doesn't respond the same way, but in this specific study, we didn't see anything. Here is just showing that we actually did have a reduction in salmonella growth and fecal score, or an improvement in fecal score with the functional amino acids added into the diet, and again, no effect of protein. We've also shown, and this is in grower pigs in another study. They saw the same thing where they added the same blend of amino acids. This is a lab out of Brazil, that the growth performance was improved. So here we have a control, or the amino acid supplemented and good, or under sanitary challenge, which is a dirty environment, and salmonella challenge. So again, growth performance is reduced, and then if you add the amino acids, you get an improvement in growth. But you don't get it in the good environment again, right? So basing it on that is not going to tell you that it's of benefit. One of the other things we wanted to know is that if you, does the time or the amount of time have any further benefit if you're adding the amino acids, or if you just have, all of a sudden you have an outbreak and you're like, okay, I'm going to adjust the diet, is that good enough? So in this study, we actually took our pigs. We either didn't give any diet supplementation, or we supplemented the diet at the time of the challenge. Up to 1 week before, or up to 2 weeks before, we gave that salmonella challenge just to see if we had any further benefit. But basically, we had a linear increase in the growth performance under challenge if the longer you were able to provide the amino acids before that challenge happened. Still a benefit though, if you're just changing the diet at the time of the challenge. When we look specifically at the immune response, and this is, I'm highlighting this because some factors didn't matter. So like antioxidant status, it didn't matter how long you gave it before. As long as you gave it, they can respond better. But other factors, actually, they are improving if you can provide it beforehand. So it is showing you that, even though it's not going into the growth of the animal, that it is helping to support the development of that immune response. So again, once they undergo that challenge, they're better able to handle it. And again, specifically too, we're seeing that this largely seems to be because it's an effect on the gut health of the animal. I will say too that these studies are also all in nursery pigs. So that is the age that we're looking at here. The timing and the stage of production is important though, and so this is one area where this is not consistent across disease types. So specifically, this was out of Nick Adler's lab at Iowa, where they looked at lysine to energy content in PRRS challenged pigs, and they saw that if you were able to adjust the diet when the challenge happened, then there's a benefit of increasing lysine, but if it was any further past when the challenge happened, it had no benefit. We've also seen that the change or where you would see the benefit depends on where you are. So in growth performance will be improved in the nursery pig. Again, this was with in a study in the Netherlands where they looked at the same blend of amino acids. But in the finisher pig, you get an improvement in feed efficiency, right? So, and I think that probably relates back to where we showed that your younger pig is going to respond to a disease challenge differently than the older pigs, so the mode of action of the amino acids is going to be different. This is one of the more interesting factors that we looked at, I feel, is because we wanted to specifically look at simple versus complex diets, or what would be your plant-based with no animal proteins really included in a nursery diet, versus one where you would include plant protein or animal proteins such as fish meal or blood plasma or stuff like that. And this came out of a study that had been done at Guelph, where they were specifically looking at the economics and growth performance in simple versus complex fed nursery pigs all the way to market. And they showed that yeah, you can feed a simple diet, nursery performance isn't the greatest, but they catch up, and then by the time you send them to market, they're fine. In that study, though, they had an outbreak, an unexpected disease outbreak in one of the groups of pigs, and they found that, oh, the plant-based didn't do as well as the animal-based. And so we wanted to follow up on that. So in this study, we took newly weaned pigs, we fed them either a plant-based diet, other than whey was in all of our diets as would be normally done, or we gave them a diet where we included animal-based proteins, and then with or without that functional amino acid supplementation. This one was different in that we fed these diets for the 4-week nursery period, and then we switched them to a common grower diet, and then challenged them with salmonella 1 week after we had switched them. So by the time we're measuring their response to a disease challenge, they're not getting the supplementation anymore. So basically what we saw is that plant-based protein pigs did not do very well at all. Their growth performance was down. If we gave the functional amino acids, we were able to slightly attenuate that drop in performance, but the animal-based fed pigs did very well, right? Their performance was better than the other ones. And this was whether or not we gave the functional amino acids to them. So we also think that there's probably something going on, that it's not just an amino acid requirement study, amino acid requirement effect in these pigs, that there are other bioactive compounds in our animal protein sources that are having a positive benefit. We also showed that this is not just for performance, that we had an improvement in fecal score, that we had an improvement in overall salmonella shedding with the animal-based compared to the plant-based, and functional amino acids was also able to help with the fecal score, salmonella translocation, and feed efficiency. So, you know, I know a lot of raised without antibiotic programs that are out there are asking you to remove the animal proteins as well. It might be something to consider, that these do have a benefit, and whether or not this is, something that you want to do, and whether plant-based, including the animal-based proteins would be better for your pigs depending on your situation. So this is just the performance numbers again, just so that you can see that I'm not lying. So in all of the nursery, no effect of the diet on growth performance in these pigs, but once we challenge them, you can see the animal-based do much better than the plant-based, and a slight increase with that functional amino acid. The final one we wanted to look at, and this is largely because of the increase in litter sizes, and we know that there's an increase in the incidence of low birth weight pigs. And so we wanted to know, do they respond the same way as a normal birth weight pig to our intervention to help with their growth? So in this situation, we identified the pigs at birth as either a normal birth weight, which was on average 1.6 kilo, and as a low birth weight, which was 1.1 kilo in our population. And again, we fed a diet that was either normal or supplemented with the amino acids. Again, we did this for 4 weeks, and then we switched them to the common grower diet. So again, we're looking at that long-term effect and not just the effect of supplementation at the time. Unfortunately, with our low birth weight pigs, their growth performance was reduced regardless of what we did. And then if a normal birth weight pig without supplementation had a reduced growth performance, but not to the same level as our low birth weight, and if we gave the functional amino acids, it improved the growth in our normal birth weight pigs. So unfortunately, these low birth weight, it was not of benefit to them. And it was the same thing that when we looked at specifically at their immune response and other factors such as fecal score, and that it was really not that effective. Again, here's the growth numbers. So if you looked at the nursery, you're not going to see a benefit, but know that when you there is a benefit to gut health and immune status, and that this is going to be seen even after you take out that supplementation. So it's something to consider talking about with your nutritionist or whatever, that this might be something to implement in your diets just in order to help with the development of the gut and the immune response in those young pigs, knowing that later on it's going to benefit you. And we've done economics on some of them. We're talking like this is almost pennies that you're adding to your feed cost, right? So it's much cheaper than even a lot of the additives that you might already be looking at including. So just to summarize, nutrient requirements to support the development or the immune response are going to be different than your growth performance. So I don't think it's really appropriate if you have these animals under challenge to necessarily be assuming that your same diets are going to be okay. The pig response is going to be affected by your age and sex and challenge type. So keep that in mind when you're looking at what you're putting in. And I think, I'm hoping I'm making the argument that adjusting your dietary amino acid performance can improve growth performance under challenge. And it's definitely helping with development in the immune response in a healthy animal even before that. So again, I'm acknowledging all the people that helped do all the work and the funders of some of the studies, and I'll answer any questions.